Thanks for joining us today. We're so glad you're checking us out. We are currently in a series called A Disciple's Journey, where we are learning that it is only by becoming a disciple are we able to fulfill the Great Commission of Jesus. You know, here at Heart for the World, we are all about life-changing stories. And if you have a life-changing story that you'd be willing to share with us, you can send it to info@hftwchurch.org. As part of these life-changing stories, we get to share the greatest story ever, the story of Jesus, our Savior, throughout Africa, Mexico, the Philippines, and throughout the U.S. If you'd like to partner with us in helping extend the reach of the gospel, you may do so by visiting hftwchurch.org/give. Our hope for you is that this message would inspire you to move from just being a believer to becoming a disciple.
We're going to look at Matthew chapter 4, and have you ever had a moment where God suddenly, unexpectedly interrupted your regularly scheduled program to invite you to something daring? An invitation that, if you took it, changed the whole trajectory of your life, your destiny, your identity, your vocation. This is what happens in this story. When Jesus walks into the lives of four fishermen, let's read about it. Matthew chapter 4, verse 18. As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will send you out to fish for people, or I will make you fishers of men." At once they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately, can you say immediately? How many know obedience is immediately? When I was young, someone taught me, when I call, don't say just a minute, say, "I'm on my way." When Jesus calls, what's the answer? "I'm on my way." And they left the boat and their father, and they followed him. This wasn't the first time they had met Jesus. Importance of this story. In fact, in John 1, we read that Andrew had told Peter about seeing Jesus. He said, come and see this man." They had probably benefited. We know Peter's mother-in-law was healed, and they were full-on believers. But Jesus comes to them to call them deeper. How many know the Lord's calling us deeper? That there's another step. And he interrupts their life. The first one was come and see. Now he says, now come and die. Come and leave your old life. The call here is a call that I believe God's wanting to give everyone in this building. He's wanting to interrupt our lives. And it's a call from being just believers to becoming disciples. It's a call to have Jesus not just as a part of your life, but the center of your life. Not just Jesus have a slice of the pie, but he has the whole, let him have the whole pie. The hub of the wheel through which the spokes of everything comes out of. There are many reasons that people believe in God and come to church, and all of them, those are good. But what Jesus was saying was a revolutionary thing. Some people come to church or believe because they have problems and they want God to help them. That's good. Some people come because they've heard about heaven and hell and they'd like some fire insurance. They'd like to be sure. And that's good too. But Jesus said, this time, I want you to come for a different reason to me. Not for what you're going to get, but I want you to come to dedicate your whole life to following, which means becoming like me. What is a disciple? A disciple, I put in your note, is someone who intentionally devotes their lives to learning how to be like Jesus would be and do what Jesus would do in their shoes if he was living where you live today. It's a complete different thing. It's not, oh, I believe in God and I know God. It's, I practice what God would practice if he was in my marriage. I go to work not to just say, oh, I believe in God, but I go to work to be the hands and feet of Jesus. Jesus with skin on to the people I meet this week. How many know that's a little different? A disciple. See, I put in your notes, all disciples are Christians, but not all Christians are disciples. Many are up in the stands watching the game, and they're fans of Jesus. Yay, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. But when Jesus says, come down on the field, whoa, that's another story. The reason this is so important, is number one, if we're ever going to have a Christian life where we really change, we can't just be people who believe in God, but we have to be people who attempt to live like Jesus lived. One of the great problems in America today, in fact, Barna, another research said that he did this, and they found 40% of people who called themselves Christians, when you studied their lifestyle, it was indistinguishable from atheists or other people. In other words, they talked the talk, but they didn't walk the walk. They still lived like the world. And the reason is because they've come to understand Christianity is more something you know in your head versus something you live with your hands. And today the Lord wants to take us somewhere, because what happens is many people will become a Christian, and for years and years they're sort of stuck. Look at this verse, 2 Timothy 3:7. They're always learning, but they're never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. Or we could look at this verse, Hebrews 5:12. It says, in fact, though by this time you ought to be teachers. Can you imagine? He's expecting everyone to be a teacher. That's what he's saying. But you need someone to teach you still the elementary truths of God all over again. You need milk, not solid food. And many Christians are like that. It's like, wow, you've been here 10 years, 30 years, but you're still the same place. You're not any different. You're just going, and it's like you never learned it. It never changed you. It was a good message, and you talked about it, but your attitude's still wrong, and your heart is still wrong. And the idea here is that growing in truth is not a matter of what you know, but it's a matter of something you're willing to start to do. And when you take this next step to be an apprentice of Jesus, this word disciple could mean, but literally what it meant is someone who attempts in everything to be like their hero. Then God can start to change you. What I find is that when someone's willing to do the little thing they can do, God does the big thing only he can do. For example, in John 8:31, he says, if you're a disciple, you will continue in my word, and you will know truth, and then what will happen? You will become totally free. Why? See, you can't make yourself totally free. That's only God can do that. But your part is to continue in the word. Are you a disciple? That means you continue in the word. You do what you can do so God can do what he can do in and through your life. And it changes you. But many people get stuck because they're still tied to the past. They don't leave their nets. You know, I heard the story of these two drunks who rowed their boat across this lake to a bar, and they drank and everything, and then it was time to go home, and so they got back in the boat and they started rowing, and it seemed like they rowed forever. 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. Finally, the sun comes up, and the guys say, man, it's a long way across this lake. It's a long way. And they turn around and look, and they're still tied to the pier. And I know a lot of Christians, they're rowing, but they never broke the rope. They're never progressing. Not only is it critical, if we're going to change, that we move from being a believer, to having Jesus as our Savior, to having Jesus as our Lord, but it's also critical if we're going to fulfill the mission Jesus gave us, called the Great Commission, which is for every one of us to make disciples who make disciples. Look at this verse, Matthew 28. These two verses, what we read and this one, go together. This was the beginning of Jesus' conversation. This was the last words he spoke to these disciples. When he gave the divine mandate for every Christian, this is what a Christian does. And so let's read it together. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples. Can you say it? Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey. Can you say obey? Say, don't teach them to recite. Don't teach them to have just a bumper sticker on their car. Teach them to do everything I taught you to do. And I will be with you always to the end of the age. What Jesus is saying is that the key to revival is for those of you who are now sons to become fathers, those of you who are daughters to become spiritual mothers. You can only make a disciple if you've become one. And then when you become one, you can touch one who touches one so that the world is saved. We've been praying for revival at Heart for the World, and I believe God's bringing it, but what the Lord has shown us is that the key to revival is not us preparing for more people to come to church, but it's for us to prepare for more people to care for all the people that are going to come to church. Maybe you can relate to this. I have 19 grandchildren. Isn't it awesome to be a grandparent? Some of you know, lucky ones like me. It's awesome. It'd be awesome to have 100 grandchildren. Except under one situation. It would not be awesome to have 100 grandchildren and no parents. How many know it's good when they all come over that they get to go home? Can you imagine a church, we get 400 more children and no parents? And you have these, can you imagine 3-year-olds and they're on the street by themselves and they're predators are after them, and that's what the church looks like in many cases. Because the people have not said, oh yes, I was discipled, but just like those disciples, Jesus said, I'm going to spend 3.5 years, I will pour everything I have into you, and then I'm gone. But if you will do the same thing for the next group, then they will do the same thing. Then in 2016, people in Las Cruces will be saved. Now, what does it mean to become a disciple? And we're just starting today, and so I'm introducing the purpose, the plan, the promise, and the price of being a disciple, and we'll go more into it next week. But the idea, the plan of discipleship was for Jesus to invite people to learn to live as he lived. He said, come walk with me. Whenever you see me do something, you do that too. The huge point of this is you only become a disciple by what you do. It's like riding a bicycle. How many know you could go to a seminar on bicycles and hear testimony of bicycle riders? And you could all clap and they could lay hands on you. But friend, you still don't know how to ride a bicycle. It's not until you get on a bicycle. Can I tell you who's growing to be a disciple? They usually have spiritual bumps on their head. Why? Because they're actually trying to do this stuff. I went and tried to witness to someone. I said all the wrong things. And I said, congratulations, though, you're a disciple. And a disciple is someone who fails 100 times because they're trying. They're not wishing, I could love to be like a disciple. Oh, no. When Jesus taught faith, he didn't give a Bible study. He said, Peter, you're on a boat, right? Get out of the boat. Okay. Whoa. All right. Are you ready to learn faith, Peter? But Peter tried. And many Christians never make the shift. How would Jesus be a parent to my kids? They ask a whole set of questions. See, if you're just a believer, if you're just a secular person, the very point of your life is different. For most secular people, the point of life is to be successful, to be comfortable, to get their own way. But to be a disciple means you have a whole new purpose. The point of your life is to become like Christ and let Christ be revealed in the world. So if you're just living for yourself and life goes good, you're happy, but if you're living for yourself and you have a trial and someone betrays you and something goes wrong, you just get mad or you get even. Why? Because your purpose was to be comfortable. But if you're a disciple, you realize, whoa, God can use trials. How many know that you learn patience by a lot of red lights? That you actually learn more from the things you suffer than from the things you succeed at. And so all of a sudden your life doesn't go right, and you're not complaining. You're saying, wow, how can I be like Jesus in this moment? How can I learn from this? And how can Jesus be more in my life? When I broke my leg, if I was still the old Dale, all I would think is, this really sucks. Broken leg. Poor me. But instead, I broke my leg, and I've been asking, Jesus, what would you do with a broken leg? How would you think about a broken leg? How would you respond? And he told me things like, you would pray for every other person you ever see with a broken leg. And pray for your therapist and try to share Jesus with them. Because the point of my life is not a comfortable life, but did I become more like Jesus? Am I more patient this week than I was 2 weeks ago? That's how a disciple thinks. I love to tell this story because it's practical. A few years ago, and many of you have heard us, but my wife and I, we had a cat that got caught in a cat trap by the neighbor across the street and taken to the pound. Though it didn't bother me too much, it really ticked off my wife. But what I loved about that, we got the cat out, and Mr. Bob was the guy's name. But what I loved was watching my wife becoming a disciple. Because what was her first reaction? Oh, Mr. Bob, yeah, I'm going to drive right by him and keep my nose in the air. And boy, I'm going to pray for him. Lord, bless him with a brick, whatever. But all of a sudden, she's having this shift from a regular person to a disciple of Jesus. And she's saying, how would Jesus act if his cat got stuck in a cat trap by a rude neighbor and taken to the pound? And so she's going through all this, huffing and puffing. I forgive. Oh, God, all this. I want you to know, disciples, it says, until Christ is formed in you. It's like labor pains. And then I see her start to make a plate of brownies. And I watch her walk over to Mr. Bob's house. I'm sorry, Mr. Bob, my cat was on your yard. We love you, Mr. Bob, and we're praying for you. Here's some brownies. He gets big old tears. He says, I'm sorry, your cat could come on our yard. About 3 months later, I get to lead Mr. Bob to the Lord Jesus Christ. Because you see, someone decided, my whole life has a different paradigm. I don't go through things to be more comfortable. I go through things to be like Christ. And this is what Jesus would do. The other part of a disciple is, he said, follow me, and that is the idea that this radical life would be done in relationship and community with Jesus and with other people. That the thing about being a disciple is that it's all about your connectedness with Jesus. As Jesus would say, if you're going to be my disciple, you have to stick with me and deliberately choose to be aware of me. Bring me to your attention throughout the day. Because it's only in the power of relationship that the ability to be a disciple comes. The most famous verse perhaps would be in Matthew 11:28 here, where he says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. See, in their society, they understood if you had a young ox that didn't know how to plow a field, you didn't give him a lecture. You took a young ox and found an old ox who already knew how to plow, and you put a yoke on him. And this young ox would walk, and he'd try to go the wrong way, but the old ox would just keep walking. And one day, the young ox would walk just like the old ox. And Jesus didn't say, go online and study a course on being like Jesus. He said, no, come on, let's go hang out. Let's go eat together. Let's cry together. Because he knew it was only intimacy with him that would be transformation in them. And still today, it's the same. It's that fact that you say, first of all, Jesus, I have got to be yoked with you. See, if you're not trying to live like Jesus, you probably don't realize how much you need him. If all you're seeking as a Christian is to be forgiven for all the stupid things you did and go to heaven, well, you don't have to think about God too much. But if you get up every morning and say, God, how can I love my enemies today? I'm going to try, but I don't think I got what it's in me to do that. all of a sudden, because you're trying to be like Jesus, you're saying, oh, Jesus, help. You're saying, Jesus, for others, you might be a crutch. For me, I need you to be my stretcher. I can't do this love. I can't do this thing of rejoice in the Lord always and have the joy of the Lord as my strength. Oh, yeah. But Jesus, I'm leaning, I'm falling, I'm collapsing, I'm depending. And in that weakness, he is strong. I love the guy who prayed, Lord, so far so good today. I haven't yelled at anyone. I haven't been greedy and selfish. I haven't complained. I haven't gossiped as much as I know. But Lord, in about 2 minutes, I'm going to have to get out of bed. And then I really need your help, you know. But you not only need the Lord, you need people. You need Jesus to be your shepherd, but you need people to be your partners, because no one ever became a disciple like Christ without other positive, encouraging followers. That's why Jesus called the 12. It was the first life group. He knew you could never get there, because being a Christian is like geese flying. They got to fly together because it's the lift of the other that keeps us above our own weakness. And so he said, this is how this works. Especially if you're a young Christian, he says, you're never going to make this thing called being like Christ unless you're really plugged in. People, I think everyone needs 3 people. You know, this can be multiplied times 10, but you need a pastor who coaches you, a partner who encourages you, and a trainee that you are teaching. And I'll talk about this later. You need a Paul, a Barnabas, and a Timothy. But you need someone not only that loves you, but someone who can say, you know, I know you don't realize it, but the way you spoke to your children, that had an edge. And I'm praying for you. And it's not all heavy. It's just your pastor is being your pastor. And then you have people who are there fighting for you. But then you have someone you're teaching. Because can I tell you, you learn twice as much about being a disciple if you're helping someone else. Can I just tell you a secret today? You know who's learning the most in this sermon? Me. Because I spent 20 hours to prepare it, and and when you have other people that you're helping, you'll grow more than ever before. The second part of it is the promise. That's the plan and the process. But the promise, I love it. It comes in 3 words. I will make you. Don't you love these words? Follow me, I will make you. Don't ever take the first 2 words without the next 3 words, right? Because if you try to follow him in your own strength, you won't make it. But if following him means, God, I'm trusting you to make me a fisher of men. I'm trusting you to shape my life. The promise is that I will be the potter, you will be the clay. When Jesus called these disciples, he said, I am 100% committed. The work that I'm starting, even if you fail 1,000 times, I will never give up on you. You see, other religious leaders had disciples. The only problem is they died and left a book. Books are hard to change by. But Jesus died and he rose again, and he still lives, and he gives you his presence. And he comes inside of you, and he gives the Holy Spirit. He says, listen, if you will listen, the Holy Spirit will be with you 24/7, and he will bring to your mind everything that I taught you in the Word. And he will say inside of you, no, this is the way to go. Walk in it. This is what Jesus would do. He will change your heart so that his laws are inside of you and you know his ways. And if you yield to him, he will actually shape and work in you the desire to be who you're supposed to be. If you will simply understand and fall back on the promise, Lord, I can't do this, but you said, it's no longer I, but Christ who lives in me. Now, this is so encouraging to me. He doesn't just require, he empowers. And one of the most beautiful things about the story is when these 12 guys that Jesus called, they were not apostles when they started this journey, believe me. How many know the disciples had a few issues? Just think about the ones Jesus called, because it's so awesome, because they're just like us. I mean, here's Peter. You think, well, Peter's pretty awesome. Yeah, but he was a cussing fisherman when he started, and he had this sort of motor mouth, foot and mouth disease. He just kind of never would stop talking. And he liked to cut off ears sometimes when he got mad. Just a few rough edges there. But Jesus said, I called you, Peter. In fact, he didn't just call out Peter. He called up Peter. He said, Peter, your name isn't Simon. Here's who you are in heaven. And I have a picture of you, Peter, how I see you as you will be. And every day you're going to hear me say, I know the real Peter. Peter, full of grace. Peter, full of strength. Self-control, Peter. And then there was Andrew. Andrew, he never said anything. Probably because he was Peter's brother. But the idea was, have you ever had people like they just never say anything and you go shake them? Are you alive? Breathe something. And you look at Andrew and you say, you're going to preach the gospel to all the world. You don't even talk. And Jesus said, just wait. I will make Andrew a fisher of men. And then you had Thomas, the skeptic. I don't know, he was fun to be around, I doubt it. Spiritual Eeyore gift or something. But God says, I will make you Thomas. And then Simon the Zealot, Simon the terrorist, great. Besides crooked Matthew, the tax gatherer who ripped everybody off. And Jesus said, you don't understand. I didn't call you because of what you are. I called you because of what I can make you. And if you stick with me, though you fall 1,000 times, I will never give up on you. In fact, right now, even as you're hearing the word, he's changing you. You don't see it because it's real slow. I love this verse in 2 Corinthians 3:18, if we could read that. It says, and we all who with unveiled face contemplate the Lord's glory are being transformed. Can you say transformed? Into his image with ever increasing glory. He says, even as you're looking on Jesus, you don't know this. He's changing you. You turn your eyes on Jesus. That's what you did. You look in his wonderful face. You call out who he is. Jesus, you're beautiful. Jesus, you're faithful. And you don't know that as you say that to him, he's making that true of you. Don't be discouraged by your progress. In John, he said, you didn't choose me, I chose you. One time as a new disciple, I said, I can't do this. I am making a mess of this. And he said, I know you can't, but you didn't choose me, I chose you, and I'll never give up. And I promise you, before it's over, Dale, you will be like me. And then the purpose of disciple, and I've said this, but it was to call us to be disciples so we could become disciple makers, because this is Jesus' plan to reach the whole world. You see, Jesus could have used any strategy. He was God, so he could have said, okay, the way I'm going to save the world is I'll be a politician, or I'll be the richest man in the world, or I'll be the strongest. I'll start an army. I'll make an army. He could have done that. What will the King of Kings do? What will be his strategy to save the world? He said, I know what I'll do. I'll just choose 12 very weak human beings. For 3.5 years, I will walk with them until they learn to live like me. And then I will turn the job over to them to teach everything I taught them to someone else. And if they'll do this, someday every tribe and nation in the whole world will know about Jesus. Friends, it worked, and it is working. And he calls us into this same process. That the true key to success is success. The true key to your success in life will be that God will use you to impart to some other person the things that you've learned in the Word. And when that multiplies, it will change the world. I say this because some of us get discouraged. Maybe you've come to Heart for the World. You've heard of this great vision. We're going to reach 1 billion souls in a generation. We're going to touch the nations. We're going to work for God, and boy, all this. And you say, well, that sounds good for them, but I could never be a part of that. I'm too old. I'm too feeble. I'm too young. I have too many issues. I'm halfway dysfunctional. I have addictions, whatever it is. But I want you to hear what Jesus is saying. He's saying you can reach all the nations of the world if you will be a disciple And if you'll just disciple one person, if you will just be a pastor to one person, you don't have to preach in front of 1,000 people. But if you will simply take whatever God gives you and say, before I die, I will impart this to someone. Jesus says you'll become a part of a redemptive chain that ultimately you'll be like this little pebble thrown in the middle of a pool. Even though it's a small splash, the ripples go to the very ends of the pool. And he says, you don't understand, when you become a disciple and you make one disciple, you change the world. Like a seed, a little apple seed, you plant the apple seed. Yes, it's just an apple. Yes, it's just one tree. But no, there's apples in that tree. And there's seeds in that apple. And that one seed becomes an orchard. And then it can be trees over the whole world. If you would simply say, God, I choose, my life will not be wasted. I will become a disciple and I will make a disciple. And if I do those two things, I will fulfill my reason for being on the earth. I love this picture. A few of you probably have never heard the name Howard Hendricks. You may have never heard him. He was a teacher. But I bet you many have heard the name Andy Stanley, Charles Swindoll, Tony Evans. What you don't understand, these guys who preached to hundreds of thousands were all taught by Howard Hendricks. He's in heaven now, but his life is reproduced so many millions of times. But what is even more cool than Howard Hendricks is the man who discipled him. His name was Walt. And Howard Hendricks told the story. He said, when he was a fifth grader, he was raised by his grandmother. Both of his parents abandoned him. He grew up on the streets of Philadelphia. When he was in fifth grade, the teachers put in the report, he is the most likely kid to go to prison when he graduates from high school. That was what he was. He had never heard about God. He had no background. But there was a man named Walt who had a sixth grade education, very simple man, who was a part of a church in inner city Philadelphia. And he decided he wanted to be a Sunday school teacher. And the pastor said, great, you can have a Sunday school class. Just go get it. Go find people. And so he decided that he would help fifth and sixth grade boys. And he said, one day, Walt walked into my world. He says, I was playing marbles in the sand. And if Walt had come and tried to give me a sermon, I would have ran home. But instead, Walt knelt down beside me and he played marbles with me. He beat me, got all my, he said, I lost my marbles early in life. But anyhow, he beat him, and he said he just loved him. He invited him to Sunday school, and to be honest, when Walt tried to teach, he'd get all mixed up because he could barely really read. The kids would take over the class. And they would say about Walt, he would say, I don't know what it is. I can't remember, Howard Hendricks said, I can't remember a single thing he taught. The only thing I can remember is he loved me more than my own parents. I only remember that he did life with me. That he was there. I graduated from sixth grade, high school. And when I became Dr. Howard Hendricks. And that moves me to say, you do not know, but there is a Howard Hendricks in your world somewhere. And that God will use you if you're willing. You're saying, God, I'm really ready, and I'll learn everything I can, and I'll listen, and I'll learn the steps of how you become a Christian. I'll learn how to pray like Jesus prayed, and then I will give them everything. And God says, if you do that one thing, you will change the whole world. And this moved me so greatly, and not too long ago, I was praying, and I was reflecting back on my life. And I remembered as a 17-year-old kid, when God called me to what I'm doing, I literally had this vision, and it rocked me completely, because in the vision, I saw the masses of millions of people, and they were walking off this cliff right into the pit of hell and the flames. And in the background, I could hear God sobbing. These people were just falling blindfolded in there. And as I watched in horror and disgust, I just felt God speaking to me. He said, Dale, would you go for me? Would you go? Would you take off the many blindfolds as you can, and would you help as many of them to know how much I love them? That day I left my nets. But a few months or so ago, I was thinking, well, Lord, it's been over 40 years, and there's 100 mission trips, and there's churches, and but Lord, I feel like I barely scratched the surface of all those people you showed me. And as I was praying, all of a sudden, just so vividly, I saw a picture of all of you sitting just like you are today. And I heard the Lord speaking to me. He says, Dale, they are your vision. And those people that you see every Sunday, I have put the seeds of greatness in some of those hearts you don't know right now, but I've put hundreds of miracles, signs, and wonders. Sitting out there is people who will raise kids that will rock the kingdom of hell to its core. Sitting out there are people who have gifts they never dreamed of. And they will try simple things and will change cities. And there will be people who will start businesses that will fund thousands of missionaries and will affect government. And I felt like he said, if you will just do this one thing the rest of your life, just equip them. Just challenge them. Push them out of the nest every time you can. Dare them to try to live like Jesus. Dare them to walk in a room and try to do what Jesus would do. To lay hands on a sick person or to say something that invites people to know the kingdom of God. And he said, I promise you, if you'll do this, every part of the vision you ever dreamed will come true and more. This is your inheritance, Dale. These people. Pour your life into them. The last point is the price of all of this. The price is total commitment and surrender to Jesus Christ. When he walks into their life, he says, you've got to leave the boat. You've got to leave. Where are we going? That's not for yours to ask. See, all these guys had ever been was fishermen. This was not just a job. This was their identity. This was their legacy. They had no other thought of how life could work. They were in this place. This was their security. And Jesus said, if you want to go on this journey called discipleship, you have to be someone who walks out into this new world with only one agenda. Where are you leading me, Jesus? I will follow. Can I tell you, you never make progress in following Jesus without leaving something behind. Everything you ever gain, you will have to give something up. I promise you that. If you want a greater anointing, you can have a greater anointing, but you will give up something. When Jesus said, come and see, then he said, come and die. He said, every miracle you will die for in some way. You will die to your pride. You will die to your selfishness. Every great thing that ever happens in your life will cost you your life. If you're willing to lay it down, you can have the kingdom. They must have wrestled with it even as they were walking. I love this idea not only of commitment but surrender. A new brother who's become a mentor to me, Dalton, said it this way. He said, commitment is what we're willing to give up so we can get what we want. Surrender is what we're willing to give up so Jesus can have what he wants. Because you see, this real commitment is, Jesus, I don't just give you some of my choices. I give you up all my options. You get to choose my life. I lay down my future. Here's my new plan. Dale Walker reporting for duty, sir. What do we do next? That's my whole life. You're the steering wheel captain. You're the driver. You're the whole thing, Jesus. And I live with everything in your hands. Now that means you have to leave your nets. I don't know what your nets, but all of us have nets. For some, the nets could be material possessions. A net is anything that competes with a total commitment to Jesus. It could be Yes, I love things and I want financial opportunity. And if I'm a radical disciple, I might not get the same financial opportunity. And Jesus said, you're right. You're going to have to leave that option. Maybe your net is people. You don't want to disappoint people. Or you have some people and you know if you go all out for Jesus, they're not going with you. You have a reputation at work, and you know if you lived like Jesus lived at your work, they would call you a Jesus freak, a fanatic, a crazy man. And Jesus is saying, would you leave your nets? For someone else, it may be a root of bitterness. You've been hurt. Your big net is excuses. I have 101 excuses why I can't, shouldn't, wouldn't. And Jesus said, would you just leave them? Would you just forgive? Would you just move on? Would you stop letting your past decide what your future will be? There's something there. When Cortez in 1519 came to conquer Mexico, at the Gulf of Mexico, he started to walk in. And the soldiers turned around, they looked, and all of their ships were on fire. He said, listen, gentlemen, we just burned all of our escape routes. There's nowhere we can go now but to go forward. We now just created the presence of no alternatives. And Jesus said, would you create the presence of no alternative for the rest of your life, but to follow him? Would you pray for me, with me, and for me? Jesus, would you come and interrupt the previously scheduled program of somebody's life right now, in this very moment? Would you come and wreck their plans so that they get to be a part of your plans? Never once did Peter, James, John regret that they left their boat and their nets. I can imagine how happy they were at the end of their life, saying, wow, I could have just been content to be a believer. I could have been content to love God and stay where I was. But I'm so glad that I became a radical disciple of Jesus Christ. And someone here today, Jesus is calling you. It's not with an audible voice, but you feel it inside of you right now. Your heart is pounding. And God is saying, I choose you, Mary. I choose you, Debbie. Robert, follow me, and I will make you something unbelievable. I will make you like me, and I will change the world through you.
Thanks again for joining us today. Part of our mission here at Heart for the World Church is to equip people to believe, belong, and become the hands and feet of Jesus. If you made a personal decision today to make Jesus your Lord and Savior, we would love to encourage you in your walk by sending you a link to a new believers video that Pastor Dale has made specifically for you. You can send us an email to info@hftwchurch.org with your personal decision and any questions you may have. God bless you.